Lovely people, Thyworm here with yet another cute little indie game, Song of Iron. There is an issue, however, it is just not very good. I was glad I finished it, but for all the wrong reasons. Today let's talk about this atmospheric 2.5D side-scroller because it's an impressive but ultimately unrewarding game. First, a little bit of history. Meet Joe Winter, an animator with 15 years of experience in the games industry working for example on Halo 5. Years ago he went on a solo dev adventure and his first project, which never saw the light of day by the way, was an open world survival game. The scope of that turned out to be way too large, the whole thing got scrapped and he created what would ultimately lead to Song of Iron. He kept working, set up a Steam page, went viral on Reddit a few times with short clips of the game, got featured in an Xbox exclusive showcase, received plenty of support from Epic and their Unreal Engine community, and finally he was able to release his first game. He wasn't entirely alone. Composer Will Goss delivered an absolutely stunning soundtrack that works really well across the entire game, and the duo appeared in a few podcasts together as well. The game released August 31st, 2021. I bought the game for around 16 euros in the Netherlands. I finished the game in 1.5 hours and the current Steam user rating at the moment of writing is 72% out of 98 reviews. And I would say that is a fair score, 6 or 7 out of 10. Let's establish what Song of Iron is about, take a look at the genre and then talk about the main gameplay elements. Song of Iron lets you pick your protagonist at the start of the game, a male or female Viking warrior. Your village is burned down and your loved one dies in your arms. You're craving revenge and you're going to pursue the killers, leading you through a wide variety of locations. Song of Iron is a very atmospheric, dark, gritty game. A big inspiration was Inside and you can see the similarities, especially around the shadowy stealth areas of the game. Those are the areas that work best and feel the most immersive. It fits the rough Viking theme, in particular when you're walking through misty forests and windy mountains. I've been fortunate enough to have visited Norway a few times and it reminded me a lot of the mountains and fjords over there. It's very well done and the graphics look fantastic. There are a few issues with the story, however. For starters, it's not a very good story. Not only is it extremely generic, it is poorly written, it's delivered in these massive text blocks in the middle of your screen, which kind of break immersion, and the ultimate issue is that the story near the end of the game completely derails and makes a twist that is utterly nonsensical. I won't spoil anything, but the third act where you confront the killer feels forced, unnatural and an afterthought, which is a massive shame. Story plays a significant role here in this game, but the choice to use text in the game as well as a massive plot twist for no apparent reason really takes away from the narrative. Visual storytelling would have been so much better here, and you would think with an animator as the only developer on the project you would go for that, but unfortunately different directions were taken. Song of Iron is described as a 2.5D side-scroller. I'll show you a section which clarifies that description somewhat. It is a side-scroller or platformer which are usually in 2D, right? And you can only move on a single 2D plane. However, the game has a lot of additional depth by adding layers in front and behind of the 2D plane you're walking on, and it places certain game elements there as well, usually enemies. For example, there is an enemy in the distance with a torch and you are closer to the foreground. You can use walls and stealth to avoid the enemy in the background. You can never move towards that enemy, but if you get spotted, they will make their way to you. These are the sort of 2.5 dimensions. I personally found this 2.5D feature working very well. It provides interesting level design options and literally some depth to the gameplay. There are roughly 5 gameplay elements. First, the combat. Your hero can pick up and wield a variety of weapons like a bow and arrow, one-handed swords, spears and axes, a shield and two-handed weapons. You find a variety of upgrades throughout the game, such as the ability to imbue your weapons with fire or lightning. Second, as an extension, there are a few boss fights, which require a bit more strategy, at least on paper. I didn't find the boss fights particularly interesting, but your mileage may vary. Third, The game has a bit of platforming going on, where you need to avoid swinging hammers and several other traps to make it from A to B. In that same league, we got in fourth a bunch of puzzles you need to solve in order to progress. Those weren't too hard, I just don't enjoy puzzles, but I won't hold that against the game. And fifth and finally, there is a stealth element. In some parts of the game, you can use stealth to sneak by, avoiding enemies, battle and potential death. Stealth as a concept works well, but the implementation isn't always clear because it can be very hard to see if an enemy spots you or not, so I always felt it was a bit of a guessing game. That is the drawback of not having a user interface, which overall is not an issue at all and it helps a lot with immersion. On paper, these 5 elements seem fine, right? Pretty standard side-scroller activities right there. In practice, however, actually hardly any one of these elements really work. The big issue here are the controls and how clunky everything feels. If you just look at the footage, you don't really notice it, I think. All the trailers looked smooth. I wasn't worried about controls at all when I bought the game, but playing the game with the controller is absolutely not smooth and feels bad. Quite often, control inputs aren't registered, meaning you block, in your mind at least, but your character doesn't, taking an axe to the face instead. Constantly there is slight input lag and controls are not responsive. Even when they register, it feels sluggish, which causes you to unnecessarily fail at most gameplay elements. The control combinations aren't great either. The result of all of these control issues and input issues is mainly frustration. The game isn't difficult or challenging even, I would argue, but it is still frustrating because your character simply doesn't do what you want. And that's kind of an issue, right? It turns all these gameplay elements into obstacles instead of fun interactions. This is the reason I was glad I finished the game after 1.5 hours. I wanted to feel the satisfaction of completing the game at the very least, but there wasn't much satisfaction there. It was mostly relief and a bit of disappointment, honestly. Song of Iron made some very questionable design decisions that haven't turned out all that well. The story and storytelling is a big one for me. A visual and atmospheric way of delivering the narrative without any text would have been so much better, and the plot twist at the end really ruined the whole story for me. The implementation of the controls is ultimately lacking, and this might get fixed with a few patches, making it more responsive. It would solve a lot of issues, but wouldn't all of a sudden save the game either or bring it to like a 9 out of 10. I'm just imagining not having combat at all in this game and just doing light puzzling, light platforming while enjoying the beautiful atmosphere, the impressive levels and the absolutely stunning music. That part of the game, which is primarily there at the start, is so well executed. It is another marvel created in Unreal Engine. It's got this amazing lighting that makes everything feel cinematic and epic. I would have loved to just walk around in the world Joe created for 1.5 hours without any interruptions at all and just take in the scenery and sort of breathe and live in this Nordic setting. Song of Iron as a walking simulator with only stealth and minor puzzles. Wouldn't that be something? Unfortunately, that's not what we got. To conclude, despite me being critical, this is not horrible in any way, alright? Song of Iron has its moments and they're beautiful, but it's not good either. And clunky controls can be a deal breaker for many people, as is paying €16 for 1.5 hours of gameplay. All in all, I hope this review left you with enough information to make a purchasing decision. That being said, I would like to thank you for watching and making it to the end. If you thought this was an interesting video, give it a like. You can subscribe for more videos like this. See you soon. Love you all. Bye bye.